I've been taking photographs for more than 40 years, and most of the time I thought I knew what I was doing. But then I came home from a sunrise photo shoot, opened the files, and looked at the photo I had taken of a pier, and I knew something was wrong. Not with the camera. The camera was fine. The problem was me. The image was sharp enough, the exposure was fine, technically it worked. But it was just a picture of a pier. It had no depth, no feeling, other than a photo. And it was at that moment that I realized I didn't need a better camera. I needed to relearn how to use the one I already had. For years, I had mostly relied on the program mode, set the dial to P, point the camera, and shoot. And you let the camera make all the decisions. And honestly, most of the time, it works. Travel photos, family photos, quick moments. Program mode can do a pretty good job. But that pier photo showed me the limit. Program mode might give you a usable photo, but not the photo you actually wanted. Program mode by itself is not bad. The problem is that it is making a creative decisions for you. It decides the aperture. It decides the shutter speed. It decides how to balance the exposure. And most of the time, it's trying to create a safe, average, technically acceptable image. But photography is not always about average. Sometimes you want everything sharp, from the front to the back. Sometimes you want the background soft. Sometimes you want to freeze motion. Sometimes you want motion to blur. Program mode does not know your intentions, only you do. It only knows how to make the exposure work. And that is where I was getting stuck. I was asking the camera to make a photograph I had not clearly told it how to make. This is where I switched to focusing on aperture priority. I started by getting off of program mode, not by jumping straight into full manual, just by moving one step over into aperture priority. For me, that was the right balance. Aperture priority allows me to control one of the most important creative choices in photography, depth of field. In simple terms, aperture helps decide how much of the image appears sharp, from front to back. Smaller f numbers gives you a shallower depth of field, whereas large f numbers can help keep more of the scene sharp. If photographing a pier, a stream, a wide landscape, then aperture matters. It helps me decide what part of the scene should stay sharp. It helps me decide what the viewer should pay attention to. Where do I want their eye to focus in the photo? And once I choose aperture, the camera helps adjust the shutter speed and the exposure. That was the shift. I was no longer asking the camera to make every decision. I was telling the camera what mattered most, and then letting the camera fill in the back. The way that I accomplished this was to simplify the exposure triangle. These three settings work in conjunction with one another. When you're in the field, especially during a sunrise shoot, the light constantly changes, and it changes fast as the sun rises up. And trying to manage all three of those settings at the same time can be distracting. The goal is not to memorize a perfect setting. There isn't one. The goal is to understand how your camera responds. Over the last year and a half, that is what I've tried to do. I photographed the same kinds of scenes over and over again: piers, streams, beaches, trees, morning lights, etc. And many times I photographed the same scene several different ways. One frame with a wider aperture, one frame with a smaller aperture, with a fast shutter, slower shutter, and then I compare the results. That repetition has taught me more than any single setting ever could. Because eventually you start to see patterns and you start to understand how your camera's really working. And slowly the camera becomes less confusing. It becomes more of a tool. A second major change I've made is intentionally taking steps to slow things down. I now use a tripod. I set up the camera, and instead of taking one picture and moving on, I work the scene. I may take 10 or even 20 photos, changing a couple of settings after each shot. And then I make some notes, not on every frame, just enough to remember what's happening. Where was I? What was it like? Was it cloudy, clear, overcast? What was I trying to learn that day? More importantly, what was my objective? This photo journal has become incredibly useful because when I get home and look through the images, I'm not guessing. I can connect the photo to the decisions that I was making in the field. But settings were only part of my learning. The other part is forcing myself to move. When I revisited the pier for a second shoot, I started from one position. I had the tripod set up an angle, roughly 40 degrees off the pier, and I could see the side and the end of the pier, and I thought, this is probably the shot. I took photos before, during, and after sunrise, and I thought, I'm done. But then I picked up the tripod and I walked closer to the pier. In doing so, the image changed, the lines changed, the structure changed, the feeling of the scene became different. And when I moved under the pier, everything changed. Eventually, I ended up with a photograph I liked much better. It was not the image I had gone there to take. It was the image I found by moving. Sometimes the better photograph is only a few steps away, as long as you're willing to leave the first composition behind. So the pier photo became a turning point for me. It showed me where program mode was not wrong, but was limiting. It was giving me technically acceptable images while I was trying to make more intentional ones. Aperture priority helps me take back one creative decision. Auto ISO has helped simplify the process, and the tripod is slowing me down. And the photo journal helps me learn from what I'm doing. None of this has made me a better photographer overnight, but it gave me a way to practice, a way to study, a way to return to the same kind of scene and understand it a little more each time. And that is really what field study is about. No shortcuts, no perfect conditions, not expecting the camera to do all the work, just going into the field, making decisions, learning from the results, and coming back better than before. I'm Peter Kreger. This is Field Study.